Welcome back. We've just done the two lectures on theological ethics, divine command theory, and theory of natural law. And now we're going to take a little side trip before we move on to other more modern ethical theories. I want to take you back to the ancient world to a different theory that some of you might think, well, why are we spending any time on that? Before we're done, we'll talk about why. Ancient hedonism. And I'm going to talk about Epicurus, and then in the second lecture, we'll talk about Lucretius. Epicurus lives in Athens in ancient Greece in the 341 to 270, so 4th and 3rd centuries BC. Now, it's important to recognize that Epicurus lives after Aristotle. Later in the course, I'm going to lecture on Aristotle. So this is one of the awkward points here. The Aristotelian stuff comes later. You haven't had that lecture yet. So I'll just give you a little bit of background. According to Aristotle, the good life is life lived in a healthy community. And so ethics and politics go together. And to live in a healthy community, you need to try to, if you're a citizen anyway, you need to try to build a healthy community and serve other people. Not serve is maybe the wrong word, but cooperate with other people to make your city do well. The historical location for Epicurus is important. And the way to explain this is a series of students and teachers. The first teacher was Socrates, whose student was Plato, two philosophers. And Plato was a philosopher whose student was Aristotle, some of the three greatest names in Western philosophy. And Aristotle's pupil was Alex. Now, you've heard of Alex, but he wasn't a philosopher. Alex is the son of Philip of Macedon. Alex is usually known as Alexander the Great. Aristotle taught Alex, and Alex decided, what shall I do? I'll go conquer the world. And he did. Because of Alexander, the Greek city-states that Aristotle lived in and philosophized for lost their independence into that is, Alexander's empire. Now, Alexander's empire lasted only a few years and was soon broken up into 4 big kingdoms, but the Greek city-states continued to be under foreign domination. The years of Greek independence that Aristotle was used to disappeared because of Aristotle's student, Alexander. There's a lot more to be said about Alexander. He ushered in the whole period of time that we call Hellenism, that is, the Greek domination of the Eastern Mediterranean. But back to our friend Epicurus. I'm just giving you a little background of when he's living and what's happening. He was born in an island called Samos, and he spends his adult time in Athens. And he says that the good life is the wise pursuit of pleasure. Now you perhaps are beginning to get an idea why we're going to spend this time on a little ancient history lesson, because here is somebody who says something very similar to what many people today think. And I think we can learn from Epicurus. Now, here are quotes, and I'm going to read off the screen, and you read along with me, and we'll get through these screens fairly quickly. These are important quotes from Epicurus. As soon as we say that the good life is the life of pleasure, Epicurus says many people get the wrong idea. This is what he says. When, therefore, we maintain that pleasure is the end, we do not mean the pleasures of profligates and those that consist in sensuality, or as supposed by some who are either ignorant or disagree with us or don't understand, but freedom from pain in the body and trouble in the mind. Okay? And he continues. For it is not continuous drinking and revelings, nor the satisfaction of lust, nor the enjoyment of fish and other luxuries of the wealthy table, which produce a pleasant life, but sober reasoning, searching out the motive for all choice and avoidance, and banishing mere opinions, to which are due the greatest disturbance of spirit. The good life is pleasure, but notice that Epicurus defines pleasure as freedom from pain in the body and trouble in the mind. That's not the wild partying that some of you thought he was talking about. Another quote from Epicurus. It is not possible to live pleasantly without living prudently and honorably and justly. You see, when you announce the doctrine that the good life is the life of pleasure, some people are going to say, well, you mean evil and taking advantage of your neighbor. Epicurus says no. Here is the pleasant life, pleasure, and here is the virtuous life, virtue. It is not possible to live pleasantly without living virtuously, nor again to live a life of prudence, honor, and justice without living pleasantly. If you are good, it'll produce pleasure. And the man who does not possess the pleasant life is not living prudently, honorably, and justly, and the man who does not possess the virtuous life cannot possibly live prudently. So Epicurus says, I'm not preaching some wild, crazy doctrine. To get pleasure, you have to be good. If you are good, you'll have pleasure. What do you think? That sounds nice. Our moms tried to convince us that if we were good boys and girls, we would be happy. But think about it. Think about Mafia Don. Mafia Don is lying in bed at 84 years old. He's surrounded by his children, both from his wife and his mistresses, and all of his sons are obedient members of the family business. The family business has been successful for many years, and Mafia Don is now finally dying after a long and pleasant life based on his family business of kneecapping people who don't pay their loans. He's a loan shark, and all his sons are involved. He is not virtuous, but he seems to have lived a pleasant life. Okay, think also of Mary, a martyr, Martyr Mary, who has been tortured and raped and is now going to die because of her goodness. We can think of easy counterexamples to Epicurus. So we are skeptical. But Epicurus also says we need to release ourselves from the prison of affairs and politics. If you're going to live a pleasant life, he says, stay out of affairs, business, and stay out of politics. Remember, the good life is the life free from pain in the body and trouble in the mind. And there's hardly anything that's going to produce more trouble in the mind than business. You think, well, if I go into business, I may fail. I may lose everything. Or you'll lose your shirt. That's right. But you notice it's even worse if you succeed. You succeed, you make money, and pretty soon you've got lots of merchandise sitting in warehouses that people might want to steal, and you have to pay for guards, and it's just trouble, trouble, trouble. So he says, every desire must be confronted with this question. What will happen to me if the object of my desire is accomplished, and what if it is not? If it's accomplished, you think, well, it'll be good. Maybe it isn't. And if it's not, oh. He says the goal in a Greek word is ataraxia, repose. So I put ataraxia on the screen. Let's think about that. Epicurus says, nothing is sufficient for him to whom what is sufficient seems little. Remember, this is the ancient hedonist who is saying, be content. The greatest fruit of self-sufficiency is freedom. So this is not wild partying. This is how to live a pleasant life, according to Epicurus. Quiet. His idea of a pleasant day, a quiet day in the garden talking philosophy with your friends. What could be better than that? Now, there's one thing that causes more trouble in the mind than anything else, and that is death. We all know that we're going to die. Epicurus found an answer by referring to the philosophy of a different philosopher named Democritus. Democritus was not a moral philosopher. He was what we would call a scientist. Democritus wanted a theory of what things are. And Democritus invented a theory which can be illustrated by the process of children growing. Children are born and they get bigger. They drink their mother's milk. As they get older, they eat vegetables and fruit and maybe some grains, and they get bigger. When they get bigger, they are not more milk, more vegetables and grains. What you have more of is meat and bones. How does that work? Democritus' theory will tell us. When a person eats his grain, his sandwich, he bites it and chews it into pieces. You might think of it as cutting. He's cutting his food. And his teeth cut his food. And then the food goes into his stomach, and we can think of the stomach as more cutting and cutting and cutting, so that the food gets smaller and smaller and smaller until finally it becomes something so small that it is not cuttable. It is atom. So Democritus invents a new word. Atoms. Atoms are the tiny little things that are so small they can't be cut anymore. So what happens in the world when a person eats? He takes food and cuts it into little bits, and then the little bits, the atoms, get reconfigured and the person grows bigger. And Democritus makes this a theory of everything. What happens when you burn wood? You throw wood on the fire, the wood kind of falls apart. Some of the atoms go up into the air as smoke, and some of the atoms are left behind as ash. Everything is made of atoms. That's Democritus. Epicurus is interested in this for one reason. What is a human being? Atoms. Another way of putting this is Epicurus is adopting a materialistic view of human beings. What is a human being? It's a group of atoms. My cup is a group of atoms. I am a human being is a group of atoms. What happens when you die? Epicurus says it's pretty obvious. Go look at a person a month or two after he or she has died. The atoms fall apart. They change their form. It's like a log that has been cut and left out in the rain. Eventually it rots and falls apart. A human body rots and falls apart. And that's it. The materialist view of a human being is you are a clump of atoms. When you die, you declump. So he says, let me back up. Death means nothing to us. For all good and evil consists in sensation, and therefore a right understanding that death is nothing to us makes the mortality of life enjoyable, not because it adds to it an infinite span of time, but because it takes away the craving for immortality. There is nothing terrible in life for the man who has truly comprehended that there is nothing terrible in not living. Death does not concern the living or the dead. For the former, it is not, and for the latter, are no more. So Epicurus says, look, why worry about death? If you're alive, you're not dead. And once you're dead, you won't be there. So there's nothing to worry about. Now, I teach at a Christian university, and I am a Christian, and many of my students are Christians. And I've heard my Christian students sometimes say, I don't know how you could live as an unbeliever with no hope. This is our first misunderstanding that we need to clear up. Many times, materialists say, no, there's no problem. You just die. It's the end. We have more to learn about ancient hedonism when we come to Lucretius. We'll do that in the next lecture.